Marcus held the watch up with 2 fingers like it was a dead insect. The crystal was shattered, the dial black with moisture damage, the caseback so corroded he could barely read the stamp on it. He turned it over once, set it back down on the glass counter with a dull, dismissive sound. "Ma'am, this hasn't run in decades. Whatever's inside is ruined. The crystal's gone. The movement is almost certainly seized. The caseback corrosion alone." He shook his head. "This is worth nothing. I can't even tell you it's worth scrapping." The old woman on the other side of the counter didn't flinch, didn't look away, didn't shift her weight or reach for the watch or apologize for wasting his time. She just stood there, hands resting on the edge of the glass, watching him with those pale amber eyes that moved too slowly and too deliberately to belong to someone who had simply wandered in off the street with a broken heirloom. Marcus almost laughed. He'd been repairing watches since he was 15 years old, but something about the way she said it stopped him. Flat, patient, not demanding, just stating. The way someone states a fact they have known for a very long time and have finally decided is someone else's turn to discover. He reached for the tool roll. That's when his hand slowed. The caseback had no standard opening. He ran his thumb along the edge, feeling for the threading. Nothing. He brought it under the examination loop and looked closer. 2 notches, 6 o'clock and 12 o'clock. Machined into the case edge with a precision that made the standard wear on the rest of the watch case look sloppy by comparison. He had never seen that configuration. In 11 years and several hundred military timepieces, he had never seen that configuration. He looked up at her. She placed a small black instrument on the counter without being asked. 6 centimeters long. Matte finish. No manufacturer's marking. The tolerances on it were extraordinary. The kind of manufacturing Marcus associated with aerospace components, not horological tools. His old defense contractor self-recognized it before his watchmaker self could categorize it. This had not been made in a workshop. This had been made in a facility. "Only 3 of those exist," she said. "I know where 2 are." He used it. The caseback released without click, without resistance, without the characteristic friction of a standard screwback. Silent. Complete. Engineered specifically to open that way. What he found inside would bring 2 government vehicles to Mill Road before nightfall. And the woman standing across his counter, this elderly stranger in a grey wool coat with worn-down shoes and a canvas bag from a museum gift shop, would turn out to be someone who had been officially dead for nearly 30 years. What did she hide inside that watch for 5 decades? And who was already on their way to take it back? Drop your city in the comments right now. And if you believe some people deserve to be remembered no matter how long history tried to erase them, subscribe. Because this story is one of those. The bell above the door of Hartwell's Watch Repair chimed at 9:04 on a Thursday morning in late October. Marcus Hartwell didn't look up. He had been doing this for 11 years. Same shop, same corner. Devereux Street and Mill Road in Ashford, Connecticut. Population 11,000, give or take. The kind of town where nothing happened by accident and almost nothing happened at all. The shop was narrow as a hallway and deep as a kept secret. Display cases ran along both walls. Glass fronts he wiped clean every morning at 7:45 with a cloth dampened with just enough solution to cut fingerprint oil without leaving streaks. His father had taught him that. Behind the cases, shelves rose floor to ceiling, movements at various stages of repair sorted by urgency and complexity, small envelopes of spare parts labeled in his own cramped handwriting, jars of lubricant oils arranged by viscosity grade for specific calibers, and tools so fine they looked like instruments borrowed from a surgical theater. Which, in their own way, they were. The smell of the place was layered and specific. Hopper's solvent at the bottom of everything, the faint, sweet petroleum note of machine oil on top of that, and underneath both, the older smell of the building itself, wood, and stone, and the particular mustiness of a place that had been continuously occupied for 70 years and absorbed the residue of all of it. Marcus had grown up with that smell. It was one of two things in his life he had never questioned. He was 34 years old and looked slightly older, not from hard living but from concentrated living, the specific aging that comes from spending your days bent 6 inches from delicate mechanisms, the slight forward hunch of perpetual magnification, the eye that had learned to focus on very small things with very high precision. His hands were the most notable thing about him physically, steady and fine-boned. The kind of hands people noticed and then trusted without quite understanding why. Surgeons had those hands. Safecrackers had those hands. People who worked with things that could not afford mistakes had those hands. He hadn't always been a watchmaker, or rather, it was always where he ended up, but not where he went first. He had studied mechanical engineering at the University of Connecticut, graduated in the top 8% of his class, spent 4 years in Boston after that doing precision component manufacturing for a defense contractor, whose work he was still technically prohibited from discussing in specific terms, though the programs involved had long since concluded or been restructured beyond recognition. The components he made had tolerances measured in fractions of microns. The applications required security clearance. The work itself was extraordinary technically, extraordinary in a way that, when he finally stopped to examine it, sat at an uncomfortable angle to everything else he thought he valued. He left Boston on a Tuesday in March, drove back to Ashford, walked into the shop his father was running, put on his grandfather's leather apron, the one worn soft at the edges, with the smell of 40 years of work already in the leather, and simply didn't leave. He told people it was about wanting a quieter life, wanting something tangible, something you could hold in your hands, something whose purpose was clear and whose effect was harmless. That wasn't entirely false, but it wasn't the complete truth either. The complete truth was more specific and harder to articulate. He had spent 4 years making components that functioned perfectly in systems designed to end human lives efficiently, and he had been very good at it. And the combination of those two facts had created something in him that needed correcting. Watches were the correction. Watches measured time. They didn't take it. Repairing them was as close to the opposite of what he'd been doing as he could find that still used the same hands. That was 3 years before the October morning when the bell chimed at 9:04. By then, the equilibrium had more or less held. At 7:02, his first customer of the day arrived. Gerald Finch, 72 years old, retired from the postal service after 31 years, widower going on 4 years now. He came in every other Thursday with his late wife Margaret's Caravelle, a modest dress watch, mid-1960s, gold-fill case worn through to the base metal at the lugs, running fine. He brought it because having it checked gave him a reason to come in. Having a reason to come in gave him a reason to talk about Margaret. Marcus understood this without being told, and had never once hurried the man. Gerald sat on the customer stool with his coffee. Marcus always put on a pot before 7, and talked for 22 minutes about a photograph he'd found in a box in the hall closet. Margaret at a county fair in 1979, holding a stuffed rabbit she'd won at a ring toss, laughing at whoever was behind the camera. Gerald didn't know who had taken it, couldn't remember. Wanted to find out because not knowing felt wrong now that she was gone, felt like a gap in the record that shouldn't be there. Marcus listened, checked the crystal, confirmed it was fine, sent Gerald home at 7:27. At 8:45, Dana Chu arrived, 29 years old, reference librarian at a university 2 towns over. She had inherited a collection of Art Deco pocket watches from a great-uncle 2 years ago, 11 pieces, ranging from standard production models to a couple of genuinely unusual Swiss pieces from the early 1930s that Marcus had been helping her research for provenance. Dana was methodical and careful and intellectually honest in a way that Marcus found refreshing. She sat with uncertainty rather than inventing comfortable explanations, which was rarer than it should have been, and which he respected. She brought in a Patek Philippe that had come back from its most recent service running 3 minutes fast per day. They worked through the possible causes together: regulation issue, temperature sensitivity, magnetization. Marcus demagnetized the movement and regulated the balance spring. Dana watched the entire procedure and asked questions that were technically precise and never performative. She left at 9:02 with the watch and a note about monitoring rate deviation over the next 2 weeks. At 9:04, the bell chimed again. This time, Marcus looked up. The woman stepping through the door was somewhere between 75 and 85. Genuinely hard to say with more precision than that. Her face had the particular quality of someone weathered by sustained outdoor exposure over many years, not the soft collapse of ordinary aging, but something more structural, lines carved by weather and time into features that had evidently been sharp to begin with. Sharp cheekbones still visible, the jaw still defined. These were not the features of someone who had spent the last decades in comfortable rooms. She wore a grey wool coat. It had been a good coat once. The quality was still visible in the cut, in the weight of the fabric. But the collar was worn flat, and the cuffs had been turned, and the whole garment had taken on that quality of something that has been maintained past its intended lifespan by someone who saw no reason to replace it while it still functioned. Dark trousers, flat shoes with thick, serious soles. The shoes were for walking long distances over uneven ground, not for standing at counters. Her hair was white and cut short and neat. No flourish. Functional. Her eyes were light brown, almost amber, and they moved across the shop the moment she entered. Corner to corner, both entry and exit points assessed, the ceiling briefly, the position of the counter relative to the walls. 3 seconds, total. Then she was looking at Marcus as if she'd been looking at him the whole time. He had seen that scanning pattern before. In Boston, in certain corridors of certain buildings, he had seen people move through spaces that way, systematically, not nervously. Nervous people moved differently, incompletely, in jagged patterns. This was professional. This was habitual. This was the movement pattern of someone who had spent so long performing security assessment on every new environment they entered that it had stopped being deliberate and become simply the way they existed in space. She carried a small canvas bag, the museum gift shop variety, dark green cotton with thin straps. The straps were worn shiny at the fold points from years of carrying. She came to the counter and stopped. "I need a watch repaired," she said. British accent, diluted by decades of living elsewhere. Connecticut vowels underneath. Some other consonants in between, European possibly, that didn't quite fit the expected pattern of either. "Of course. What's the problem with it?" She reached into the canvas bag and removed something wrapped in a cotton polishing cloth, the lint-free kind used for cleaning lenses and optical surfaces, folded with precise rectangular accuracy. She placed it on the glass counter in front of him. She did not unwrap it. She held her hands at her sides and waited. Something about that pause, the specific quality of it. Marcus set down the movement he'd been holding and gave her his full attention for the first time since she walked in. "It stopped," she said, "about 30 years ago." He reached for the package, unwrapped it, pushed the cloth aside. The watch was military. That was the first categorization his brain made. Not maker, not era, not caliber, but use class. Military. Steel case, 38 millimeters. Severely utilitarian. No decorative elements. Matte black dial. Arabic numerals. Luminous material on the indices that had faded from active green to a dead cream over decades. The crystal was replacement plexiglass, scratched and slightly hazy. The crown was screw down. The case showed wear that was heavy and uniform, not the collector's patina of careful ownership, but the honest wear of something used consistently in difficult conditions and then simply stopped being used. He turned it over. The caseback carried the British government's broad arrow mark, the ownership stamp he recognized from dozens of military pieces that had come through the shop. Below it, a serial number, military issue format, and below that, a designation code that should not have been there in any format he had ever seen on any piece he had ever handled. 2 letters, 4 numbers, a dash, a single letter, BW4419X. He looked up at her. This is British military issue. Yes. The broad arrow marks it as government property. What branch? Her amber eyes didn't move. The calm in them was too complete. Not the absence of tension, the disciplined management of it. A distinction that takes years to build and is invisible to people who have never needed to build it. Look at the movement before you ask about provenance, she said. What you find will make the questions more interesting. He almost laughed. He was 11 years into this work, and he knew what a dead movement felt like when he held one. He knew the specific weight and rattle of seized gears. He knew the smell of lubricant gone acidic from age. He could have told her in 30 seconds more than she probably wanted to know about the probable condition of whatever was inside. But something in the flatness of her tone, the patience in it, the absolute absence of salesmanship or urgency, the quality of someone who has been waiting a very long time for a specific moment and recognizes, without drama, that the moment has arrived, made him reach for the tool roll without another word. And then his thumb found the caseback edge, and everything he knew about how watch cases opened stopped applying. He ran his thumb around the caseback perimeter twice, then a third time, more slowly, pressing slightly. No threading, no standard caseback lip, just the smooth, slightly rough surface of corroded steel with... He brought it under the magnification stand and adjusted the light. 2 machined notches. 6 o'clock position. 12 o'clock position. Each notch cut with a precision that was dramatically better than everything else on the case's exterior. Recent work on an old case, or original work of a quality that had been deliberately hidden under subsequent aging. He straightened from the magnification stand and looked at her. This caseback doesn't have standard opening. No, I don't have the tool for it. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, not quite anything he could name. She reached into the canvas bag without looking down and placed a small instrument on the counter between them. Matte black finish, 6 centimeters long, modified case wrench profile on one end, engagement tips that corresponded precisely to the notch dimensions he had just measured. There were no manufacturer's markings on it. There were no identifying features at all. Just the instrument itself, made to a tolerance and finish quality that Marcus, with his defense contractor background, with his 4 years of working on components whose precision was measured in ways the human eye could not verify, immediately recognized as extraordinary. This had not been made in a watchmaker's workshop. This had been made in a facility with equipment that most commercial watchmakers would never have access to. Only 3 exist, she said. I know where 2 are. Marcus picked it up, turned it over, ran his fingertip along the engagement tips, feeling the geometry. Perfect. He set the engagement ends against the notches in the caseback, took a breath, and applied rotational pressure. The caseback released. No click, no friction, no resistance. A perfectly silent, perfectly smooth, engineered release, as if the caseback had simply decided to come free. He lifted it clear, and his hands stopped moving. The movement was modified, not lightly, not incidentally, significantly and deliberately modified by someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had access to tools and skills far beyond the standard watchmaking trade. The base caliber was a Swiss lever escapement from the late 1960s, heavily altered. He identified the original as an ETA variant by what remained of the unmodified train architecture, but integrated into the movement, built into the case architecture below the main plate, where a standard watch had nothing but the inner surface of the caseback, was a secondary space, a compartment, constructed with the same extraordinary precision as the caseback notches and the opening tool, sealed by a membrane, synthetic polymer, he estimated, thinner than 1/4 millimeter, edge-bonded to the caseback liner with an adhesive that had maintained a hermetic seal for, he did the math quickly, more than 50 years. Inside the membrane, visible as a darker rectangle against the lighter interior, was something flat, something folded, small enough to fit in the available space, no larger, he estimated, than a standard postage stamp when unfolded. Marcus set the caseback down carefully, set the opened watch down carefully, removed the loupe from his eye, and looked across the counter at the woman standing there with her amber eyes and her grey wool coat and her worn museum gift shop canvas bag. "There's something inside this watch," he said. His voice had changed. He heard it change and didn't try to prevent it. "Behind the movement, in a sealed compartment." "Yes. What is it?" 47 clocks ticked around them. A truck passed outside on Devereux Street. The fluorescent tube above the examination bench hummed its constant single note. A perfectly ordinary morning in a perfectly ordinary watch shop. "It's the reason I've been carrying that watch for 53 years, she said. He offered her tea. She accepted. He went to the back room and made it. Electric kettle, 2 ceramic mugs from the shelf above the sink, Earl Grey from the tin his father had kept refilling until the day he died, and which Marcus had continued to refill without thinking about why. He brought both mugs out on the green enamel tray with the chip on the left corner that he had been intending to repair for 3 years. She was sitting on the customer stool when he returned, back straight, feet flat on the floor, hands resting on her knees. The posture was not stiff. It was settled. The way a discipline that has been practiced for decades settles into the body and becomes indistinguishable from the body's natural state. She accepted the mug without looking at it, held it in both hands, did not drink. "Tell me about the shop," she said. It was not small talk. He understood that immediately. She was performing an evaluation, not of the shop, but of him through the shop, through what he chose to say and how he said it, and what he left out. He had seen this kind of conversation before, in Boston, in certain rooms, with certain people. Information gathering that wears the costume of casual inquiry. He decided to be straightforward. He told her his grandfather had started the shop in 1951, returned from Korea with a Purple Heart and a lasting disinterest in anything that required large-scale coordination with other human beings and a deep, particular affection for things that could be understood completely. Mechanisms, tolerances, the pure logical satisfaction of a system working exactly as designed. He had opened the shop because a watch was a thing you could hold in one hand and understand entirely, and after Korea, he had needed that. He told her his father had grown up in the shop, inherited it, expanded the specialization into military timepieces. Veterans trusted the shop because it understood the objects they brought in, not just as mechanisms, but as history, as records of service. He told her about Boston, the engineering degree, the defense contractor work. He used general terms. She didn't push for specifics, which told him she already knew the specifics or understood why he wasn't providing them, either of which said something. He told her he had come back because he needed the correction, because watches were the closest opposite he could find to what he'd been doing that still used the same hands and the same precision and the same sustained attention. She listened to all of this without interrupting. Full attention, evaluative without judgment. When he finished, she set down her tea mug, still untouched, which he noted, and said, "Your grandfather started this shop in 1951. "Yes. He served in Korea. field maintenance of precision instruments. He looked at her more carefully now. How do you know that? A man I worked for 30 years kept records of everyone who had ever been useful to the programs he ran. Not official records, personal ones. Your grandfather's name was in those records. I saw it once in passing in 1982. I didn't know what it meant then. When I started trying to find someone who could do what I needed done, I remembered the name. I looked up the shop. Marcus was quiet. He looked at the photograph tucked behind the register. His father had always said it was left behind by a customer. 7 young men in uniform, standing somewhere cold and bright, faces washed out by sun glare or age or the specific chemistry of whatever film had been in the camera that day. He had looked at it 10,000 times. Your grandfather is in that photograph, she said. 3rd from the right. The man next to him is named Arnold Chiswick. Chiswick designed the modification system in this watch. Marcus turned and looked at the photograph. 3rd from the right. Lean. Young. Hands at his sides, fingers slightly curved in the way of someone who used them for precise work. He had never known who any of the figures were. His father had never explained them. The 47 clocks ticked. You didn't come here randomly, Marcus said slowly. No. You came here because of my grandfather. I came here because of the connection between your grandfather and the man who built this watch's modification. And because you have the hands and the training and the clearance history to authenticate what I need authenticated. And because, she paused, because the shop is still here, still in the family. That matters. That was part of what was planned. What was planned by whom? The man who recruited me, Arnold Chiswick's colleague. She looked at the watch, still open on the counter between them. He died in 1989, 2 weeks before the wall came down. Officially cardiac arrest. I believed it for 30 years. She paused. The pause had weight. 3 months ago, I received a letter from his son. The letter said his father had left him instructions. If I were still alive, and if the watch still existed, I should find someone who could open it carefully enough not to destroy what was inside. Read what I found. Decide what to do with it. Marcus looked at the open watch, at the sealed membrane, at the flat rectangle of preserved paper visible through its polymer skin. What did he think you'd find? Marcus asked. What did he tell his son to prepare you for? He told his son, Vera said carefully, that inside the watch was proof. Proof of who authorized the operations that my program was blamed for when it ended. Proof of who signed the orders and then denied signing them. Proof of who let the operators, the people who were actually there, who actually did the work, carry the responsibility for decisions made by people sitting in offices who needed the work done but needed to remain clean. She set her hands flat on the counter, looked at him. He told his son it was enough to reopen 3 closed inquiries and implicate 14 people who are still alive. The shop felt smaller, the walls closer, the ticking of 47 clocks louder, or perhaps just more present, each one marking the same second in its own separate way. Who are you? Marcus said. She said her name, Vera Moss. And then she paused, in the way someone pauses before adding a qualifier that changes the meaning of everything before it. That's the name I've been using for 23 years, she said. Before that, it was Claire Rosenthal for 11. Before that, it was several others for shorter periods. My actual name, the name I was born with in Warsaw in 1945, is Vera Helena Kozlowski. I've kept the first name because there's a floor below which relinquishing identity causes damage that doesn't repair. The first name was the floor. Marcus was quiet. I was recruited at 23, she continued. 1968, trained for 2 years. Then I went to work. 17 years of active operations. Western Europe primarily, Eastern Europe twice, Southeast Asia twice. I was what the service called an intelligence operative. What that meant, in practice, was that I collected information and occasionally facilitated the collection of information by other means, in places where my government needed things to happen that couldn't be officially connected to my government. And then? Programs end. The people running them change. The strategic context shifts. The funding dries up or gets redirected, and the operatives who staffed the program are given a choice: appear before a parliamentary inquiry and discuss methods and operations that are still being used, or accept a new identity and a pension and a very clear instruction to never appear again. She said this without particular bitterness, like someone describing a weather pattern. I chose disappearance, she said. Most of us did. The few who chose the inquiry either died before testifying or found that the inquiry had been quietly restructured to ask different questions. The program was closed. The records were officially destroyed. The operations we conducted became events without agents, things that happened by themselves, officially. And unofficially? Unofficially, certain people were blamed. Certain operations were described as rogue actions, unauthorized. The responsibility was assigned downward to operators who were either dead, disappeared, or in no position to contradict the official account. The people who signed the authorizations, who planned the operations, who gave the orders, who decided which targets mattered and which collateral outcomes were acceptable, walked away, clean, senior. Some of them have had 30 more years of career since then. She touched the edge of the open watch with one finger. Just a touch, like checking that it was still real. "What's in that watch?" she said. "Has 43 of their names on it, with dates, with operation codes, with a ministerial letterhead." Marcus looked at the watch, at the membrane, at the flat rectangle of preserved paper inside. He looked at Thomas Aldrich's business card sitting on the counter. Because Thomas Aldrich had walked in at 11:30 that morning, while Vera was still in the shop, while she had made herself so still in the periphery of the room that the other customers barely registered her presence, which Marcus had recognized as a practiced skill and filed away without comment. Thomas Aldrich, medium build, dark overcoat, quality that was notable in Ashford. The same scanning pattern as Vera when he entered. Corner to corner, entry and exit, 3 seconds, done. Mid-Atlantic American accent, carefully neutral, the kind produced by people who need their speech to leave no geographic trace. He had said he was looking for a British military watch, BW series. Specific modification. He'd said the words "you'd know it" if you'd seen it with the confidence of someone who already knew it had been seen. He'd left a card, plain white, name and phone, no company, no affiliation, the kind of card used when you want to be findable but not traceable. And now things had taken a darker turn than Marcus had anticipated when he opened the shop that morning, because Thomas Aldrich was not a collector, and the watch on his counter was not a broken heirloom, and the woman sitting on the customer stool with her untouched tea and her steady amber eyes was officially dead. What happened next, no one who was in that shop that morning could have predicted. But Marcus Hartwell, who had spent 4 years manufacturing precision components for systems designed to function without error in high-stakes conditions, began preparing the way he had been trained to prepare before he became a watchmaker, methodically, without panic, with the understanding that the time for thinking had been and gone, and the time for acting correctly had arrived. They moved to the back room at 11:47. Marcus locked the front door, turned the sign to closed, drew the interior blinds, the ones he used during sensitive repair work, their current use indistinguishable from normal purpose to anyone observing from outside. He brought the watch, still open, to the high magnification fixed lens on the back workbench and adjusted the light. Vera Moss stood beside him, close enough that he could hear her breathing, slow and measured, the respiratory rhythm of someone managing adrenaline through discipline rather than its absence. He examined the membrane under full magnification. It was extraordinary work. Polymer, certainly, some synthetic compound he couldn't identify by appearance alone. Thickness less than a quarter millimeter, he estimated. Sealed at its edges to the caseback liner by an adhesive whose chemical composition he couldn't determine visually, but which had maintained a hermetic bond for more than 5 decades without any visible degradation or separation. Inside the membrane, he could see it clearly under this magnification. The slight differential in opacity where the folded paper sat was the document. Folded 8 times to fit the available space of approximately 12 by 14 millimeters. Thin paper, specialized, the kind produced specifically for applications where minimum bulk was required. If I remove this incorrectly, Marcus said, the contents could be damaged. I know, Vera said. I've thought about that for a very long time. Would you prefer to? No. Her voice carried no self-recrimination. Pure clinical assessment. My hands don't have the steadiness they did. That's the reason I needed someone else. That's partly why I'm here. He worked for 24 minutes. Scalpel, surgical grade, the one he kept in the precision instrument drawer for work on movements too delicate for standard tools. Microforceps he normally used only for hairspring manipulation. Magnification set to the maximum his bench lens provided, which made the membrane surface fill his entire field of view, which was exactly what this required. First incision, one edge, applied with the patience of someone who had spent 11 years relearning that the relationship between speed and precision was not additive but inverse, that every additional second of care was worth 3 seconds of corrective work after an error. The membrane gave cleanly. The hermetic seal separated from the edge adhesive without tearing, without contaminating the interior. The air that sighed from the compartment was 53 years old, sealed in West Germany in November 1970. He could not smell it exactly, the volume was too small, but there was a barely perceptible shift in the room's atmosphere. Something mineral, something faintly metallic. The particular quality of preserved air that has not moved or changed or responded to the world's changes since the moment it was enclosed. He extracted the folded paper with the microforceps. It came free without resistance. The preservation inside the membrane had been complete. No moisture intrusion, no physical deterioration of the paper's structure. It was as intact as the day it was placed inside. He set it on a clean examination cloth. He unfolded it. With the first fold, he saw type. With the second, he saw numbers and dates. With the third fold, he could read enough to understand the category of document he was holding. By the 6th fold, the letterhead was fully visible. By the 8th and final fold, when the document lay completely open under the bench light, he read it beginning to end. He read it a second time, slowly. He straightened from the bench, removed the magnification lens from in front of his eye, looked at the woman beside him. "This is a list of names," he said. "Yes, 43 names, with operation designation codes and dates. Yes, there's a letterhead at the top." His voice had gone very quiet. "This letterhead, this is from the Office of the Chief of Staff. This is a ministerial document. This is not a field document. This is not operational correspondence. This is authorization from the top." "Yes." He read a name near the top of the list. "Read it again." "This person is still alive. He's been in public life continuously for 30 years. He has an active advisory role with the current government." 14 of the 43 are still alive, Vera said, in various capacities. 2 retired, 4 still holding active positions or active consultancies. "What does this document prove precisely?" She was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, organizing. "It proves authorization," she said. "Direct ministerial authorization for operations conducted under false flag conditions. Operations attributed in official accounts to foreign actors or to unauthorized rogue elements within intelligence services. Operations that resulted in deaths. In 3 cases, civilian deaths. The deaths were real. The authorization was real. What was false was the attribution, the carefully constructed official record that said these things happened without anyone in authority ordering them to happen. She looked at the document lying on the examination cloth. The people on that list signed orders. Their names are on this document, not as signatories of later reports, not as overseers of programs that went wrong, as authorizing officers for specific operations, with specific dates, with specific targets named in the operation codes. And they denied it. They denied it. And when the program was shut down and the inquiry came, the operators, the people who actually conducted the operations, who were actually present, who actually did what they were ordered to do, were left holding authorization that had been quietly removed from the record. Your colleagues. My colleagues. She said it simply, not with grief, with precision. Some of them died before the inquiry concluded. Some disappeared. 2 testified and found that the questions had been restructured to avoid any line of questioning that led back to this document or anything like it. Marcus looked at the document. 43 names. Ministerial letterhead. Dated. Specific. How did this end up in your watch? The man who recruited me, Vera said. He was the officer responsible for managing the documentation of the program. When the shutdown order came and the records were being destroyed, he made a copy. 1 copy. He made arrangements for it to be preserved. In this watch, in this compartment, which he had one of his technical people create specifically for this purpose. He gave the watch to me on my first active deployment, in November 1970. Did you know what was in it? No, not then. I knew the compartment existed. I was told it was standard issue for our unit, for carrying microfilm if needed. I used it twice for that purpose, in 1974 and again in 1976. After those operations, the compartment was cleaned and left empty. Or I believed it was. She paused. He put the document in it when I wasn't present. He made it part of the watch without my knowledge. And then, in 1989, when he died, he left instructions with his son. Instructions that led, eventually, to the letter I received 3 months ago. Why did he do it that way? Why not tell you? She considered this. Not because she didn't know the answer, because she was deciding how much of it to give him. Because he knew, she said finally, that if I knew I was carrying it, I would have either used it immediately when the program ended and the operators were being blamed, or I would have destroyed it to protect myself. He needed it to survive long enough for the conditions to exist under which it would actually matter. That meant years. Possibly decades. He calculated, correctly, that the watch would survive as long as I survived, because I always had it. And he calculated that eventually the window would open, that the people on that list would get old enough, that the institutional structures protecting them would weaken enough, that a partial truth was better than no truth. And now the window is open. It was the son's judgment that it was. And the son knew things about current conditions that I didn't. So I trusted him. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up Thomas Aldrich's card from where it was sitting on the counter, looked at it. How long have they known you were activated? Since approximately 48 hours after I received the letter, I made certain inquiries about the modification system, about the technical record, that were traceable if the right people were monitoring the right databases. They've been watching. They don't know what I found. They know only that I'm looking. That's sufficient motivation to send someone like Thomas Aldrich. Who is he, specifically? Private security, high-end, retained by the family interests of at least one of the individuals on that list. Former intelligence, probably, given the way he moves and reads a room. Not government anymore. Private. Which means fewer procedural constraints. Marcus set the card down. We need to move quickly, he said. Yes. He picked up his phone. The call that changed everything came to Marcus's phone at 2:17 p.m. He had spent the preceding hour and a half photographing the document, systematic, complete, section by section under the bench magnification, and uploading the photographs to 3 separate encrypted cloud storage accounts. He maintained these accounts with the same forward-thinking anxiety that had once led him to keep his security clearance current long after the Boston work was over. He had not specifically anticipated needing them. He had simply never been able to stop being the kind of person who maintained them. Unknown number. Connecticut area code. Hartwell's. The voice on the other end was female, older, authoritative in the particular register of someone who had given orders long enough that authority had ceased to be something she performed and had become something she simply was. Marcus Hartwell. My name is Patricia Vane. I'm the daughter of Arnold Chiswick. He steadied himself against the edge of the workbench. You sent the letter, he said carefully. He looked at Vera. She had gone completely still. I sent a letter to the woman currently in your shop, yes. I've been waiting 3 months for this call. My father left me instructions, specifically that if she brought the watch to someone capable of opening it, I was to make contact immediately. What do you want from us? To complete what my father spent the last 2 decades of his life engineering. He chose Vera because she was the most professionally capable person he had worked with in 30 years of running field operations. He chose her because her specific qualities, her ability to preserve herself, to remain invisible, to survive, made her the most probable carrier of this evidence to the moment when it could be used. He chose your grandfather's shop because Eamon Hartwell served alongside him in Korea and was the only person outside the service he had ever trusted with precision work that couldn't be discussed openly. He spent 20 years building the pathway from the watch to the right hands to the right moment. That all of this has converged on you now is not chance. It is engineering. 50 years of patient, careful engineering. Marcus looked at the photograph on the backroom wall, the duplicate of the one behind the register, the 7 young men in the cold, bright light, third from the right, hands at his sides, fingers slightly curved. What do you need from me? He said. Witness, she said. That is the specific function my father built you into this plan to serve. Your technical expertise, your ability to authenticate the watch modification, to describe in professional terms what was inside and how it was preserved, to speak to the document's physical characteristics and provenance. Your security clearance history, which gives your professional testimony a verifiability that most civilians would lack. Government records can be destroyed or reclassified. A credentialed, clearance-verified technical witness with a documented professional history and no conceivable motive to fabricate is significantly harder to erase. And the man who came in this morning, Thomas Aldrich. A pause, brief but meaningful. You've already had contact. That's faster than I anticipated. Another pause. Aldrich works for a private security firm that is retained by the family interests of at least one individual named in that document. He is not currently government, which means more operational flexibility and fewer procedural constraints than a government actor would have. How much more flexibility? Enough, she said, that you should not be alone in that shop tonight. And should not be alone in the shop until copies of that document are in enough hands that any action against you or Vera would create more problems than it solved. He looked at Vera. She was watching him with her amber eyes. Calm. Listening. Waiting. He set the phone on the bench between them and switched it to speaker. Vera, Patricia Vane said, are you ready for this? Vera Moss looked at the document on the clean examination cloth. At the 43 names that had traveled inside a watch case for 53 years to reach this bench, this room, this moment. I've been ready since 1970, she said. At 3:30 in the afternoon, Marcus walked to the back corner of the storage room. The floor safe sat beneath a section of removable shelving in the corner closest to the exterior wall. It had been there when he inherited the shop. His father had mentioned it exactly twice in Marcus's lifetime, once when Marcus was 19 and asked directly about it, at which point his father had said only that it contained things that were not his to open, and once on his deathbed when he had said, "There are things in there that aren't mine to give away. They belong to the people they were kept for. You'll know when it's time." Marcus had opened it twice, once immediately after his father's death, an inventory made necessary by grief and practicality. Once when he was looking for a specific insurance document his father had mentioned keeping there. Both times he had found the same collection. He had looked at it without the context to understand it. He had closed the safe again. He had waited. He opened it now. He carried the contents to the back workbench and spread them out under the light. Then he stepped back and let Vera look. What she saw was a second ghost file, not identical to the one in the watch, complementary. The other half, Eamon Hartwell's half. 40 years of correspondence, letters, each one handwritten on paper whose weight and quality had been selected for longevity, stored in archival sleeves, between a watchmaker in Ashford, Connecticut, and a man in London. Maintenance records, supply logs, request forms for specialized components. The addresses on the London correspondence, Vera recognized the street, recognized the building number, were those of a particular administrative unit within a particular service that had not officially existed when the letters were written and did not officially exist now. 40 years of correspondence, never more than 4 letters a year, sometimes only 1, but unbroken, maintained from 1951 to 1989 across 4 decades of Cold War, of shifting alliances and closing borders and the ordinary catastrophes of time. A thread of connection between 2 men who had served alongside each other in Korea in 1951 and then spent the next 4 decades as each other's most trusted external contact. At the bottom of the file, in a separate envelope, labeled in Eamon Hartwell's handwriting, the handwriting Marcus recognized from the shop ledgers his grandfather had left, from the margin notes in the technical manuals on the reference shelf, a single letter V. Vera picked it up. Her hands, for the first time since she had walked into the shop that morning, were not entirely steady. Marcus watched this without comment. She opened the envelope, read the letter, read it a second time. The shop was quiet enough that he could hear the paper in her hands. When she looked up, something had resolved in her face. Not broken open, not collapsed, settled. The particular settling of a calculation that has been running for decades and has finally, in this room, in this moment, reached its conclusion. He says, she stopped, cleared her throat precisely, started again. He says he kept this archive because he believed that what we did mattered, that the program itself was not wrong. It was built for legitimate purposes by people who understood the stakes, that the corruption was specific, that the people on that list took something legitimate and used it for purposes that could not survive scrutiny, and then when the scrutiny threatened to come, they protected themselves at the expense of the people who had done the work. She set the letter down with careful deliberateness. He says the operators deserve to have the truth told about who authorized what, not for revenge, for record, so that the account of what happened would be accurate rather than convenient. She paused, and then he says he's sorry. He says he knew my cover was blown in 1989. He knew before I did. He made a decision about how to handle it, about what my safety required in the specific moment. And he made the wrong decision. And he spent 30 years knowing he made the wrong decision. And he was sorry. Silence. That's why the watch stopped, Marcus said quietly. 1991, 2 years after you found out. Yes. You were going to walk away from all of it, from the watch and what was inside it. Yes. She touched the edge of the letter, just the edge. And then I didn't. Because the watch was still there. Because what was inside it was still there. And because she paused long enough for it to be a real pause, a pause that contained something. Some debts don't stop being owed because the creditor apologizes. Marcus thought about his grandfather's hands in the photograph, about what it meant to build a mechanism specifically designed to outlast you, to construct carefully over years a system whose purpose would only become clear after you were gone, to trust, without the ability to verify, that the right person would be in the right position at the right time to understand what they were meant to do with it. That was not hope. That was engineering. He came back at 4:45. Marcus had expected him by 5 at the latest. Patricia Vane had confirmed it during a second call at 3:55. A grey rental vehicle had been stationary on Mill Road for approximately 2 hours, positioned with a sightline to the shop's front entrance, waiting for closing time, waiting for the approach after hours that said certain specific things about the kind of approach he was authorized to make. Marcus had done 3 things between 3:30 and 4:45. First, copies, physical scan of the complete document, digital upload to 3 secure accounts confirmed, 1 physical copy, sealed in a plain envelope, no return address, priority mailed to Patricia Vane's attorney in Washington, D.C., whose name and address Patricia had provided during their second call with the calm efficiency of someone who had been maintaining this contingency for years and was relieved to finally be deploying it. Copies in motion, in multiple jurisdictions, in hands that were not his. Second, calls. Whitmore first, Robert Whitmore, who had been bringing in his private collection of vintage aviation chronographs for service twice a year for 3 years, who had never once directly acknowledged the professional background Marcus had long since identified him as carrying, but who answered the phone on the first ring when Marcus called and said without preamble, "How long do I have? 20 minutes? I'll be there in 15. Then Deanna Park, county sheriff, whom Marcus had known since she was a deputy and he was new in town, thorough, unimpressible, disinclined to defer to claimed authority she couldn't verify. He described Aldrich, gave her the partial plate from the rental car. She took the information without drama and said she'd have a car on Mill Road within the hour. Third, the decoy. A military field watch from the back display case, BW series, early 1970s, similar enough to Vera's watch in external profile and wear to survive a brief visual inspection. He wrapped it in cotton polishing cloth, placed it in a canvas bag, dark green, the same museum gift shop variety as Vera's, set it on the front counter in the position where a recently received intake piece might plausibly be sitting. Real document, floor safe. Real watch, floor safe. Copies, in transit. Chess pieces in position. At 4:44, Whitmore walked in through the back and positioned himself in the storage room with the door cracked. At 4:45, the bell above the front door chimed. Thomas Aldrich came in. He assessed the room in 3 seconds. Marcus had his hands on the counter, the canvas bag between them, the back room door closed. Aldrich looked at each of those 3 things in sequence. Then he looked at Marcus. "You closed early," he said. "Slow day. You left a card." "I did. Did you turn up anything matching what I described?" "I found a BW series piece that came in earlier this week." Marcus pushed the canvas bag slightly forward. "This what you're looking for?" Aldrich approached the counter. He didn't reach for the bag immediately. He read the room first. Marcus's hands, the position of the bag, the angle to the back room door, the space behind Marcus. Assessing. He was good at this. Marcus could see that clearly. But he was operating on the assumption that the room contained 1 known variable and 1 unknown variable, and his calibration of the unknown variable was incorrect. "The caseback," Aldrich said. His voice had changed from the display he'd used that morning. Quieter, more direct. "Has it been opened?" "The case is intact," Marcus said, which was precisely true. Aldrich reached for the bag. The back room door opened. Vera Moss came out slowly. controlled pace, hands visible and empty at her sides. She walked to the end of the counter and stopped, looked at Thomas Aldrich with her amber eyes, said nothing. Aldrich went completely still. This was a different kind of stillness from Vera's, not disciplined, not managed. This was the sudden arrest of motion that comes from having every operational assumption simultaneously invalidated. He recognized her. His face confirmed it in the half-second before his professional training suppressed the confirmation. He had been given a description, a photograph presumably, and he recognized her and had not expected to find her here, standing, calm, with her hands visible and her weight balanced, and that particular quality of patience that comes from 50 years of knowing that the outcome has already been determined and that what remains is simply the process of reaching it. "Whatever name you have for me," Vera said, "you don't need to use it." She came beside Marcus, both hands flat on the counter. "You're looking for something that was inside a watch. The watch has been opened. The contents have been removed, documented, photographed, and transmitted. Physical copies are in transit to 2 locations. Digital copies exist in 3 separate storage systems in 2 jurisdictions. The original document is not in this building. What is in that bag on this counter is not what you came here for." Aldrich's professional mask had fully reassembled, but the calibration beneath it had changed. She could see it. So could Marcus. "You understand what you're releasing," Aldrich said. Quiet, direct. The pitch of someone past the point of performing and into the territory of actual negotiation. The disruption, the damage to ongoing processes, the people affected. 43 people authorized operations that resulted in civilian deaths, Vera said. Her voice was perfectly steady. 14 of them are still alive. They have lived for 50 years in the condition of having allowed other people, operators, field personnel, people who carried out orders, to be blamed for decisions those 14 people made. My colleagues, some of whom did not survive to see those decisions blamed on them. She did not raise her voice. She never raised her voice. The disruption this causes is not my concern. The record is my concern. The accuracy of what is written down about what happened is my concern. Those things now exist independently of anything you or the people who sent you can do to prevent them. The back door opened. Whitmore stepped into the main room. He moved to stand near the front entrance with the ease of someone who had stood in difficult doorways before and found the experience instructive rather than intimidating. Aldrich looked at him, looked at Vera, looked at Marcus, made the calculation. He picked up his card from the counter, placed it in his coat pocket, straightened the front of his coat with 2 precise adjustments. "This isn't finished," he said. "For you it is," Vera said. "You're a contractor. The people who retained you will terminate contact within 24 hours of the first copy reaching its intended destination. That process has already begun. The window for any action that would meaningfully change the outcome closed approximately 4 hours ago. Go home, Mr. Aldrich." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his face. Not defiance. Something more complicated. The look of someone who has been in this profession long enough to recognize, when they see it, a situation that has been run correctly by someone who has been doing this longer and at a higher level than they have. He left. The bell chimed. The door closed. Nobody moved. The 47 clocks continued their collective measure of time. Whitmore exhaled slowly. "Cleaner than I expected." "He's professional," Vera said. "Professional people don't make messes when the mathematics don't support it. The mathematics stopped supporting it this afternoon." She looked at the open watch on the counter, at the document beside it, at the photograph on the wall. She did not say anything else for a long moment. Neither did Marcus. 3 days later, the first story was published, not in a national newspaper. In a specialist intelligence history publication, London-based, peer-reviewed, read by approximately 40,000 people worldwide, who followed Cold War operational history closely enough to maintain subscriptions. The writer had spent 11 years researching the specific intersection of British and American intelligence operations in Western Europe during the 1970s. He had received an encrypted email 3 months earlier from a woman who said she had documentation he would want to see. He had spent 3 months building context, verifying what could be verified through public record, preparing the analytical framework that would make the document's significance comprehensible to readers. When the document arrived, physically, through Patricia Vane's attorney, accompanied by a technical authentication statement from a watchmaker in Connecticut with a documented security clearance history and 11 years of military timepiece expertise, he had everything he needed. The piece was careful, precise, named the program, described what it had done and what had been falsely attributed to others in its name, named the false attributions specifically, described the mechanism by which the document had been preserved, mentioned, without identifying, the operative who had carried it for 53 years, 12,000 shares in the first 24 hours. 3 national newspapers picked up the thread by the second day. The Guardian ran a follow-up. The Times ran a follow-up. By the end of the first week, the story had broken through to the general news cycle. The legal process had already begun quietly through channels Patricia Vane had spent years maintaining. Submission to the Parliamentary Intelligence Committee in the United Kingdom, submission to the relevant oversight body in Washington, documentation filed with the International Criminal Court's Archival Division, not as a formal complaint, not yet, but as a record, as an existence proof that could not subsequently be unmade. Marcus read the first story at 7:15 in the morning, standing at the front counter of his shop with his first coffee of the day. The shop smelled the way it always smelled. The 47 clocks ticked the way they always ticked. The photograph was on the wall where it had always been. He called Vera. She answered on the second ring. "Did you see it?" "Yes." "How do you feel?" The pause was long enough to contain something real. "I feel," she said, "the way a watch feels when you wind it again after 30 years. Not new, not as it was, but running." He was quiet for a moment. The clocks ticked around him. "The watch," he said. "Your watch. I'd like to service the movement properly, make it run the way it's supposed to, if you'd like to bring it back." Another pause. Shorter. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that." She brought it in the following Tuesday, morning light, thin and clear. October yielding to November. He worked on the movement for 3.5 hours. Complete disassembly. Every component cleaned in fresh solution. The mainspring replaced. The original was fatigued beyond safe use after 5 decades of storage tension. Each jewel lubricated with the correct grade of oil for its function in the train. The escapement regulated. The balance spring checked for flatness. Reassembled in the correct sequence, each part seated with the care he gave everything, and the additional care he gave to things that had come a long distance to reach his bench. When he wound the crown, the second hand began to move. Smooth. The clean, living sweep of a well-regulated lever escapement performing its designed function. That delicate, precise, continuous tick joined the voices of the 47 clocks on the walls. The 48th voice. Distinct but consonant. He handed it back to her across the counter. She put it on her wrist, looked at it. The matte black dial, the faded tritium plots, the worn crown, the military caseback with its broad arrow and its empty compartment. Empty now, finally, after 53 years of carrying something that was not a watch's job to carry. "It's running," she said. "Yes." "How long will it last?" "Properly maintained?" He thought about it genuinely. "Another 50 years. The caliber is sound. The case is structurally intact. This watch has decades left if someone takes care of it." She looked at him with her amber eyes, something in them that might have been, in another face, warmth without complexity. In hers, it was warmth with all its history intact, Qualified, earned, offered not easily, but genuinely. "Thank you," she said, "for the watch, for opening it correctly, for everything else." "Thank you for coming in," he said. She left. The bell chimed, the door closed, the news cycle continued. Names were named, not in the specialist publication, but in the follow-on reporting, as parliamentary proceedings made the document a matter of public record, and the 14 living individuals on it became the subjects of formal inquiry. 3 resigned from positions or advisory roles within the first 2 weeks. 1 issued a public statement through counsel that denied prior knowledge of the document's specific content while acknowledging the general existence of the programs described. Most said nothing, which was noted by every journalist covering the story. Marcus gave 2 formal interviews, both to print publications, both on the record. He spoke carefully in technical terms about what he had examined and what he had found. He described the modification system, the caseback tool, the membrane, the preservation conditions inside the compartment. He described the document's physical characteristics, the paper grade, the typeface, the letterhead format, the condition consistent with storage dating to the early 1970s. He described the authentication chain, the records in his grandfather's floor safe, the correspondence, the photograph, the connection to Arnold Chiswick. He said his grandfather had been a man of precision and patience, who had understood that some mechanisms need to be built to last longer than the hands that built them. He said that good engineering is, at its core, a form of trust extended into the future, a decision to believe that the moment you cannot see from where you are standing will eventually arrive, and that what you make now will still be usable then. The shop stayed the same. Gerald Finch came with Margaret's Caravelle. Dana Chu came with another piece from the great-uncle's collection. A retired schoolteacher from the next town brought in a pocket watch her father had carried through the Pacific in 1943. The work continued because work, unlike events, does not resolve. It continues, modified by what has happened but not stopped by it. In December, a letter arrived from Anya, Vera's daughter, Montreal, 38 years old, an architect who designed buildings intended to be inhabited for a century. She wrote on plain white paper in clear architectural handwriting, compressed, precise, every letter formed with the deliberateness of someone who thinks about the permanent record of things. She wrote that she had read the coverage, that she had, in the course of reading it, understood things about her mother that had never been explained and that she had long since stopped expecting to understand. That she had been angry, first, at the years of careful withholding, at the controlled distance, at the version of her mother she had been permitted rather than the complete version. That the anger had shifted, in the course of a week of thinking, into something more complicated and more complete. That she wanted her mother to know she was proud, not of the programs, not of the methods, of the specific choice. 53 years of carrying something that needed to be carried, and then the choice to finally bring it into the light. The choice to say, "This happened, these are the names, I was there, and I remember." Vera forwarded the letter to Marcus with one line attached. She has her grandfather's eyes for structural integrity. Marcus read it in the back room with his 3rd coffee of the morning. The pocket watch he was working on, a Longines from the early 1920s, extraordinary condition, extraordinary caliber, sat on the timing block performing its function with the same mechanism it had been performing for 103 years. Tick, lock, unlock, tick. The same 17-tooth cycle at the same rate, maintained by the same physical principles that had governed it the day it left the factory and would continue to govern it long after every person in this room was gone. He thought about his grandfather, about a young man squinting into a camera in the cold, bright light of Korea in 1951, hands at his sides, not knowing that the photograph would end up on a wall in his grandson's shop, and that a woman would walk in one October morning and identify him by the hands. Some truths are not lost, Marcus thought. They are only delayed. waiting in whatever vessel keeps them intact for the precise convergence of conditions that allows them to emerge without damage, the right person, the right tools, the accumulated readiness of the right moment. That was not luck. That was engineering. In March, the Georgetown University Archive sent confirmation of receipt. The Hartwell collection, 43 years of correspondence, supply logs, maintenance records, a floor safe's worth of material that had been waiting in a corner of a Connecticut watch shop for the context that would transform it from secret into history, catalogued under Cold War-era civilian support networks in Western intelligence operations, 1951-1989, Eamon Hartwell's name, in an official document, in a repository open to researchers. For the first time in 72 years, in a document that anyone could access, he was precisely who he had been. Marcus framed the catalogue page, hung it beside the photograph on the backroom wall. His grandfather's face, still slightly blurred, still squinting at whoever was holding the camera, but now with a name below it, with a context, with the truth of what he was standing in when the shutter clicked. 6 months after the October morning when the bell had chimed at 9:04, Vera Moss came into the shop one last time. No watch, nothing in her hands. She walked to the counter and stood across from Marcus in the same posture she had arrived in that first morning, weight balanced, shoulders set, amber eyes moving across the room in their 3-second systematic pattern before settling on him. "I'm going to Montreal," she said. "My daughter has a spare room. She's offered several times. I've decided to accept." "That's good," Marcus said. She looked around the shop, at the clocks, at the display cases, at the framed photograph and the framed catalogue page side by side on the wall behind the counter. "It looks different," she said, "from the first time I came in." "Same shop," Marcus said. "No," she said, not unkindly, with precision. "Not the same shop." She was right, and he knew she was right. But there was something true in his version too. Same smell, same light, through the same windows, at the same angle in the same season, same hands on the same counter, giving the same care to the same work. The depth had always been there. The shop had always been what it was. What had changed was only what was visible of it. "The watch is running well?" he asked. She raised her left wrist, the military watch, where it had been for 53 years. The second hand swept its smooth, living arc. "Perfectly," she said. She extended her hand across the counter. He shook it. Her grip was firm, the specific firmness of someone who has spent a lifetime learning the calibration between holding on and holding too hard. Enough force to maintain contact, not enough to cause damage. The calibration that all precision work is ultimately about. She left. The bell chimed. The door closed. Marcus stood at the counter for a long moment. 47 clocks ticked around him, each in its own rhythm, diverging and converging in patterns that never fully repeated, counting the same time in 47 different ways. Maintained because someone had decided they were worth maintaining, not for rarity, not for value, but because they were true, because they did the thing they were made to do, because precision, in the right hands, in the right context, is not violence. It is witness. He picked up the loop, went back to work. The next customer arrived at 10:15. Young, nervous, a cloth bag held in both hands, the grip a little too tight. She looked like she had already prepared herself to be dismissed, had arranged her expression in advance around the expectation of being told that whatever she had brought was not worth anyone's time. Marcus set down his tools, looked up, smiled. "What can I help you with?" Have you ever been in the presence of someone hiding something extraordinary behind an ordinary life? Have you ever witnessed the moment when someone who was supposed to stay hidden decided they were done hiding? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share the name of someone who deserved to be remembered and wasn't. And if you believe that truth matters no matter how long it has been buried, subscribe, because there are more stories like this one. More people who carried something for decades because the moment wasn't right yet, and then one October morning walked into a quiet shop and decided that the moment had arrived. Silence should never be the final answer.